Okay, picture this scenario. You're at a dinner party. It's one of those nights where, the wine is flowing, the conversation is getting a little intense, and the topic turns to genius investors.
Always a contentious topic.
Right. Someone immediately brings up Warren Buffett, value investing, patience, drinking cherry Coke,
Mm-hmm.
the slow and steady approach.
Of course, the Oracle of Omaha.
Then someone else jumps in with, like, Elon Musk, the visionary, the high-tech risk, the guy who's, sleeping on the factory floor.
Two very, very different archetypes of success.
Exactly. But then you chime in. You lean over the table and you say, what about the guy who called himself the grave dancer? The guy who turned dead buildings into gold mines and then sold his entire empire for $36 billion right before the world ended in 2008.
And the room probably goes silent because half of them think you're talking about, I don't know, a supervillain from a comic book.
Exactly. And in a way, the story we are covering today has all the beats of a supervillain origin story, but it also has the beats of a classic pull yourself up by your bootstraps American dream success story. It is messy. It's so incredibly complicated.
Is the story of Sam Zell.
We're looking at a stack of sources today, that is. It's heavy. I mean, physically heavy. We've got biographical records. We have these financial autopsies of the 2008 crash. There are legal filings from one of the largest bankruptcies in media history. And we even have Zell's own writings.
Right. His book, Am I Being Too Subtle?
Which tells you a lot about the guy right there.
Yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty specific. We aren't just reciting a biography. We want to figure out how a man develops a sort of sixth sense for market timing. How do you know when to buy when everyone is screaming sell? And, maybe more importantly, how does that same genius lead you to make one of the most catastrophic business mistakes of the 21st century?
It really is the ultimate case study in risk. I mean, Sam Zell was a man who lived on the edge financially, legally, and, personally. He passed away in May 2023, and he left behind a legacy that is equal parts textbook brilliance and cautionary tale.
So let's start with that name, the grave dancer. Most CEOs hire these expensive PR firms to make them sound friendly and approachable.
Oh, yeah, they want to be the visionary or the builder or...
The connector. Sam Zell wrote an article in 1976 titled The Grave Dancer, A Guide to the Risky Art of Resurrecting Dead Properties. He owned it. He put it right out.
He didn't just own it. He branded himself with it. And to understand why, you have to understand what the economic world looked like in the mid-'70s. It wasn't today's world of, high-speed trading and complex algorithms.
No, not at all.
The real estate market had crashed, and crashed hard. Developers were defaulting on loans left and right. There were these half-finished skeletons of buildings all over American cities. It was a wasteland.
And most people, rational people, look at a half-finished building owned by a bankrupt developer and they see a disaster. They see a money pit. They run the other way.
Of course you do, because a dead property is a headache. I mean, it has liens, it has all these legal issues, probably angry tenants, maybe even structural problems. It's just a mess.
But Zell looked at it and saw a mispricing. He realized that if he could buy the asset for pennies on the dollar, literally below the cost of replacing the bricks and the glass, he don't need the market to boom.
Right. He just needed the building to function. He could make his money just by bringing it back to life. So he, as the name suggests, danced on the graves of the developers who got overextended.
It's such a vivid image, isn't it? But before we get into the mechanics of how he made billions doing that, and we will get into the weeds of the strategy, I want to back up. Because you don't just wake up one morning with the guts to look at a financial disaster and say, yeah, I'll take it.
No.
That kind of risk tolerance, that feels innate, or at least learned very, very early.
It is innate, but it's also inherited. I mean, if you look at the origin story section of our notes, it reads like a spy thriller. We throw the word survivor around a lot in business. He survived the dot-com bubble. But Sam Zell's parents were literal survivors of an apocalypse.
We're talking about World War II here, the real deal.
Yes. His parents, Ruchla and Berexilenka, they were Jewish, living in Poland in 1939. This is right at the onset of the Nazi invasion. Now, just try to imagine the atmosphere. It's just confusion, terror. Most people in their community were hesitating, maybe hoping things would blow over, or they were simply trapped with no way out.
But Zell's parents...
They made a split-second decision to run, to just go.
And they didn't just hop on a train to France or take a boat to England, which would have been the more common escape route.
No, those routes were closing fast or already gone. This is one of the most fascinating details in the biographical records. They went east, they fled through the Soviet Union. And to do that, They needed papers. They needed a way out.
This is where that name Shioni Sugihara comes in. I've heard him called the Japanese Schindler.
That's a really fair comparison, and honestly, he deserves a deep dive of his own. Sugihara was a Japanese diplomat stationed in Vilnius, Lithuania. He went against direct orders from his government in Tokyo, and he started handwriting transit visas for Jewish refugees.
Wow.
He was writing them for 18, 20 hours a day until his hands literally cramped up. He saved thousands of lives. And Sam Zell's parents were holding some of those precious visas.
That gives me chills. So the very existence of this future billionaire real estate tycoon hinges on a rogue diplomat signing a piece of paper in Lithuania in 1940. It's incredible.
It really is. It shows you how fragile history is.
Yeah.
But getting the visa was only step one. They still had to cross Russia. And this is where the chutzpah, which is a word we're going to use a lot regarding Zell first, appears.
Right.
They're traveling through the Soviet Union, a place that is hostile to practically everyone at that time. To avoid suspicion, they didn't act like desperate refugees.
I read this note in the source material, and I actually laughed out loud. They pretended to be tourists on a cultural trip.
They pretended they were traveling across the entire continent specifically to see the Bolshoi Ballet.
That is just, it's beyond belief. The world is burning. You are fleeing for your lives. You have the Nazis behind you and the Soviets all around you, but you act like you're just really big fans of ballet. Oh, we're just here for the culture.
It's a survival mechanism. It's fake it till you make it, but with, life or death stakes. They traveled from Russia to Japan, then to the United States, eventually settling in Chicago. Specifically, they moved from Seattle to Albany Park first.
And Sam was born in Chicago in September 1941. So just 4 months after they arrived.
4 months.
So he's born into this energy of we beat the odds, we are smarter than the system.
Exactly. His father changed the name from Zelenka to Zell. He started as a wholesale jeweler, but quickly moved into real estate and stocks. And Sam grew up watching this. He grew up hearing the stories of the escape. He learned very, very early on that rules are, well, let's call them suggestions for other people.
Right.
But for the Zells, survival meant outsmarting the system. It was baked into his DNA.
And that manifested pretty early, didn't it? The Playboy story is the classic anecdote here. It's almost legendary in business circles.
It is, and it's funny, but it's also a perfect lesson in arbitrage. So Sam is a teenager. He lives in the suburbs of Chicago. He takes the train into downtown. Now, think about the geography. What does downtown Chicago have that the quiet suburbs don't?
Newsstands. Specifically, newsstands that sell Playboy magazine.
Correct. And who lives in the suburbs? Teenage boys who desperately want Playboy but are too scared to ask their parents, or they're just unable to get to the city to buy it themselves.
So he sees a market inefficiency.
A huge one. So he buys the magazines for what, 50 cents a pop?
Something like that.
And he brings them back to the suburbs. He's essentially acting as a smuggler of culture of a sort. He brings them to his Hebrew school classmates and sells them for $3.
That is a massive markup. I mean, that's a 600% markup.
It's classic arbitrage. He found a market inefficiency, a geographic barrier to entry, and he exploited it. He wasn't creating the content, he wasn't writing the articles or taking the photos. He was just moving the asset from a place of low value, the newsstand where it was common, to a place of high value, the Hebrew school locker room where it was contraband.
It's the same exact logic as shipping oil from where it's plentiful to where it's scarce.
Yeah.
He just did it with centerfolds. It's incredible.
And he did the same thing with photography. In 8th grade, he took photos at the prom. He realized that the memory of the event was a distressed asset, people wanted it, and if he didn't capture it, it was gone forever.
So he cornered the market on memory.
Exactly. He developed them and sold them to the students. He saw the angle.
The guy was just wired differently. I mean, most kids are thinking about how to pass algebra or who they're going to ask to the dance. He's thinking about supply chains and monopoly power.
And that escalated when he got to the University of Michigan. This is where the grave dancer really begins to take shape. He wasn't just doing odd jobs for beer money. He started managing an apartment building, a 15-unit building.
In exchange for free rent, right? That was the initial...
At first, yeah, that was the deal. I'll plunge the toilets and collect the checks if I can live here for free. A classic student job. But then he looked at the math. He looked at the landlord's headaches, tenants calling at 2 a.m. about leaky faucets, vacancies, all that stuff.
An operational nightmare.
Right. And he realized he could solve those problems for other owners in exchange for a cut of the profit. He partnered with his fraternity brother, Robert H. Lurie.
Okay, so this partnership, Zell and Lurie, this is crucial to the story, isn't it? Because Zell was the loudmouth, the front man, the guy on the motorcycle, the personality.
Right. Zell was the deal guy. He was the rainmaker. He was the one selling the vision to the property owners. Lurie was the engineer. He was the operations genius. He was the guy who made sure the toilets actually got fixed on time, that the heating systems worked, and that the books balanced.
It's a classic Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak dynamic, but for student housing in Ann Arbor.
It's a perfect analogy. You need both. You need the vision and you need the execution.
So by the time Zell graduated from law school, and I want to emphasize, he went to and finished law school in 1966. What were their numbers looking like?
The numbers are staggering. They were managing over 4,000 apartments.
4,000! That is a small city. That's a huge operation for anyone, let alone a couple of college kids.
It is huge. And they weren't just managing. They owned between 100 and 200 units outright. By then, they were netting about $150,000 a year.
In 1966 dollars.
Which is, what, over $1 million a year in today's money? Something like that, all while being full-time students.
That is absolutely wild. Most law students are just trying to pass the bar exam and find a junior associate job where they can make coffee, and this guy's running a massive property management firm.
Exactly. So he steps out of law school, passes the bar, and he practically never practices law. Why would he? He's already a real estate mogul. But the key takeaway here isn't the money, I don't think. It's the dirt under the fingernails experience.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of modern finance guys go straight from an MBA to a hedge fund. They look at spreadsheets, they build complex financial models, they treat buildings like bond yields, they just see a number in a cell.
Right. It's abstract.
Very. But Zell knew what a bad boiler looked like. He knew what kind of carpet lasted the longest in the student rental. He understood the product. He had been the one getting those 2 a.m. calls. And that gave him a massive advantage when he started buying graves.
Because he could look at a failing building and
He could know exactly how much it would cost to fix it because he'd done it himself. He could see past the financial statements to the actual grunt and mortar. That's a huge edge.
Okay, so he has the operational chops. Let's fast forward to the 1970s. The grave dancer era really kicks off. The economy is in the tank. We have stagflation. Interest rates are climbing. Banks are panicking.
The 1973-1975 recession was brutal. It was the first major economic contraction since the Great Depression. Real estate developers, who are optimists by nature, had completely overbuilt.
They always do.
They always do. They borrowed money assuming the good times would roll forever. And when the music stopped, they were left with half-empty office towers and apartments they couldn't fill. The whole industry was on the verge of collapse.
Enter Sam Zell.
Enter Zell. The banks were stuck holding the bag. A bank does not want to own an apartment complex. They don't have a maintenance department. They don't want to deal with evictions or marketing. They just want their money back.
So Zell walked into these banks and said, essentially, I will take this headache away from you.
That was the pitch. But he didn't just buy them with cash, right? He used these really creative structures.
He was a master of the workout.
That's the term. He would say to the bank, look, if you foreclose, you'll be lucky to get 50 cents on the dollar, maybe. And you have to manage it for 2 years, which you're terrible at. If you let me take over, I'll manage it, I'll turn it around, I'll pay you back your principal over time, but I keep the equity upside.
So he's betting entirely on his ability to fix the unfixable. He gets the asset for almost no money down.
And he was betting on inflation. This is a technical point, but it's so important to his strategy. Zell understood that in an inflationary environment, hard assets like real estate go up in value. Even if the cash flow is bad today, the bricks are worth more tomorrow.
Right, because the currency is worth less.
Exactly. So he locked in long-term fixed-rate debt on these properties. And then he just let inflation erode the value of the loan while the property value skyrocketed. It was genius.
That is smart. It's using the macro economy as a tailwind. But we have to talk about the risk, because it sounds easy in hindsight, but there were moments where he was skating on really thin ice. The Reno deal.
Ah, yes, the Reno hidden gem. This was 1969, so slightly before the big recession plays, but it was a sign of things to come. He found a building called Arlington Towers in Reno, Nevada. It was the top of the market there, tallest building in the city. He bought it for $9 million.
But the deal had, as they say, hair on it.
A lot of hair. The sellers wanted a very specific and creative tax treatment. Zell wanted the deal. So according to the biographical records, his brother-in-law concocted a scheme. It involved offshore transactions to shield the sellers from taxes.
Offshore transactions in 1969. That sounds sketchy even for back then.
It was. It was a really complex series of transfers designed to look like one thing while being another. The legality was described in the sources as murky at best, and, well, the IRS eventually audited it. They didn't like what they saw.
And this is where we see Zell the pragmatist versus Zell the loyalist, a real crossroads.
It was a pinch point. The feds were circling. Zell made a calculated decision. He cut a deal. He agreed to testify about the entire scheme in exchange for immunity from prosecution.
And the brother-in-law, the one who designed the scheme.
He went to prison. He served 2 years in jail.
Oof. That is cold. I mean, that's family.
It's ruthless. But from Zell's perspective, it was survival. If he goes to jail, the empire collapses. Everything he's built is gone. He chose the empire over his brother-in-law. It's a dark chapter, but it reinforces that grave dancer mentality. You do what you have to do to keep the music playing.
It certainly adds a layer of, I don't know, grit to the persona. It's not just about smart math. It's about navigating these really treacherous waters and coming out on top.
And surviving. That's the key theme. He survived that, and he survived the recessions. He kept building. He and Robert Lurie built what became Equity Residential, this massive apartment company.
But then tragedy strikes in 1990. Robert Lurie dies of cancer. He was only 48 years old.
This was a devastating blow. Not just emotionally. I mean, by all accounts, they were like brothers. But operationally. Zell was the kite. Lurie was the string. Without Lurie, Zell was untethered. And this happened right as the early 90s recession hit.
Another recession. The timing was just brutal. But this time, the stakes were way higher.
Much, much higher. By 1990, the numbers were astronomical. Zell was personally guaranteeing loans. The sources say he had roughly $600 million in personal guarantees.
Let's just pause on that for a second. A personal guarantee means if the company goes bust, the bank comes for your house, your car, your personal bank account, everything. It's all on the line.
Everything. He was on the hook. He later described this period as the most stressful of his life. He was working 80-hour weeks, juggling creditors, trying to keep the liquidity flowing. And he realized that the lone wolf cowboy model wasn't sustainable anymore.
He couldn't carry that much risk on his own back.
No, the numbers were too big. So he changed the game again. He looked at the public markets for a way out.
This is one of his biggest contributions to the financial world, isn't it? He popularized the modern REIT, the Real Estate Investment Trust. In 1993, he took his apartment empire public as Equity Residential. Okay, so explain a REIT to me, like I'm 5.
Sure. Before REITs became popular, if you wanted to invest in real estate, you had to physically buy a building. That requires a ton of money, lawyers, inspections, and it's really hard to sell quickly. It's illiquid.
Right.
A REIT is like a mutual fund for buildings. It's a company that owns real estate, and you can buy shares of it on the stock market, just like you buy shares of Apple or Google.
So it makes real estate liquid. You can buy and sell it in a day.
Exactly. And for Zell, it did something even more important. It allowed him to raise a huge amount of cash from public investors, money he used to pay off those personal debts.
So he traded ownership for safety.
That's a perfect way to put it. He diluted his stake, but he eliminated that $600 million gun pointed at his head. He spread the risk.
And he grew the company massively in the process.
Massive. By the IPO, they had 22,000 apartments, a long, long way from that 15-unit building in Ann Arbor.
But the real masterpiece, the Mona Lisa of his career, you could say, came a decade later. The sale of EQ Office.
This is section 3 in our notes, the sale of the century. And this is the moment that really cements the legend. It's what everyone points to.
It's 2006. The real estate market it's foaming at the mouth. Prices are going up every single month. Everyone is buying. Credit is cheap. You could get a loan if you had a pulse.
The bubble. We all remember it. But inside the bubble, it just feels like a party. You know, it feels like it's never going to end. Zell, however, is looking at the numbers. He sees that the prices people are willing to pay for office buildings make absolutely no sense relative to the rent they can collect. The cap rates were compressed to historic lows.
It was pure speculation.
It was. So he decides to sell. Not just one building, not a few, the whole thing.
He puts his entire office portfolio, EQ Office, up for sale, and he finds a buyer in the Blackstone group.
Blackstone is the biggest of the big boys in private equity. They're the whale.
They are. And they were hungry for assets. So in February 2007, the deal closes. Zell sells EQ Office to Blackstone for $36 billion.
Let that number sink in. $36 billion.
It was the largest leverage buyout in history at that time.
It was, and the date it's the most crucial part of the story. Early 2007.
Right. Just months before the subprime mortgage crisis triggered the Great Recession. By late 2007, the cracks are showing. By 2008, Lehman Brothers collapses and the global economy just melts down. Commercial real estate values plummeted.
They fell 30, 40, sometimes 50%, just wiped out.
If he had waited 12 months,
Yeah.
even 6 months,
the deal would have evaporated, gone. The company might have gone bankrupt. Instead, he walked away with billions and billions in cash at the absolute tippy-top peak of the market. It is widely considered one of the greatest sells in the history of Wall Street.
And it wasn't luck, was it? Our sources are pretty clear on that. It was that same instinct from the Playboy days. This asset is overpriced here, I'm getting out.
It's discipline. He had a famous saying, liquidity equals value. He valued the ability to get out more than the potential to squeeze the last dollar of profit from a deal. And that discipline saved him.
But he didn't sell everything. He kept the mobile homes, which I find fascinating.
Equity lifestyle properties. This is my favorite part of his portfolio because it is so unsexy. Mobile home parks.
Trailer parks, essentially.
Yes, he owned over 400 of them. And here's why they are a genius business model. If you own an apartment building and you jack up the rent by 20%, the tenant moves down the street. It costs them maybe $500 to move a couch and a bed.
Right. High turnover.
But in a mobile home park, the tenant owns the home, a physical box, but Zell owns the land under it. To move a mobile home costs thousands and thousands of dollars. It often damages or destroys the home.
So they can't leave.
They never leave. It is a captive audience. The cash flow is incredibly stable and predictable. It's an annuity.
That is diabolically smart.
And it's recession-proof. When the economy tanks, people downsize into mobile homes, demand actually goes up. Zell didn't care about the prestige of owning the shiny skyscraper. He cared about the reliability of the check clearing every month.
It really fits his persona, doesn't it? Unpretentious, cash flow heavy assets that other people might, look down on.
Value is value wherever you find it. And that philosophy didn't stop at real estate. This is where we see Zell the corporate raider.
Right, because once you have that much capital and that much confidence from a sale like the Blackstone deal, you start looking at other sectors.
In 1991, even before the big sale, he started the Zell Chillmark Fund. The goal was to invest in distressed securities, junk bonds, companies in bankruptcy. He was applying the grave dancer logic to corporate America.
What were some of the companies on his shopping list?
It's a real nostalgia trip. Schwinn Bicycle Company.
The bike company, the one we all had as kids.
Yes, they're in bankruptcy. He acquired them for $60 million in 1993. 4 years later, he sold the company for $86 million. Not a bad return at all.
Not bad for a side hustle.
He did it with the Revco drugstores. They were in a messy bankruptcy. He invested $250 million. When Rite Aid eventually bought the brand, he walked away with $363.8 million.
So he also got into radio with a company called Jacor and department stores with Carter Hawley.
The strategy was always consistent. You buy the debt when the company is on its back. That gives you leverage. Then you take control of the equity during the restructuring. You fix the balance sheet, and you sell to a strategic buyer. It worked in real estate, and for a while it worked in corporate private equity.
Okay, so by 2007, Sam Zell is on top of the world. He's the genius who timed the market perfectly. He has billions in the bank. He has this bulletproof reputation as the grave dancer who can fix anything. And I feel like this is the exact moment where hubris enters the chat.
It is the classic Greek tragedy arc, isn't it? You conquer the world and you start to think you can walk on water. Or, in Sam Zell's case, walk on ink. He turned his eyes toward the media industry.
The Tribune Company.
This is an American institution.
A shine.
The Chicago Tribune.
Yeah.
The LA Times. Newsday. The Baltimore Sun. They owned the Chicago Cubs. They owned Wrigley Field. It was corporate royalty.
But it was a distressed asset, a falling angel.
It was, absolutely. The internet was just eating newspapers alive. Classified ads were moving to Craigslist. Readership was dropping. Revenue was in a nosedive. Zell looked at this and thought, it's just another distressed asset. It's just another building with bad management. I can fix this.
But a newspaper isn't a building.
No. A building doesn't have an editorial board. A building doesn't have a sacred public service mission. And a building's value isn't based on how many people read it every morning with their coffee.
Oh.
Zell applied his real estate playbook to a media company, and it was a catastrophe.
Let's break down the deal, because the financial structure here is infamous. It was an ESOP, right? An employee stock ownership plan.
Yes, and that sounds good, doesn't it? An ESOP is usually a nice way to give employees a stake in the company, but Zell used it as a tax shield. It was a very complex maneuver. By structuring the company as an S corporation owed by an ESOP, the Tribune Company would theoretically pay 0 federal income taxes.
Okay, that sounds clever from a tax perspective.
It is clever, but the purchase price was $8.2 billion. And here is the kicker, the part that everyone always remembers. How much of his own money did Sam Zell put in?
I'm guessing to control an asset that big, at least $1 billion, maybe $2 billion.
$315 million?
Wait, He bought an $8.2 billion company for $315 million. How is that even possible?
He used leverage, massive, massive leverage. He loaded the company up with $8 billion in new debt to pay off the old shareholders. So the company is now swimming in debt, and Zell controls it for a tiny fraction of the cost.
That sounds like buying a mansion with a credit card and then making the mansion pay the credit card bill.
That is exactly what an LBO, a leveraged buyout, is. And if the mansion or the newspaper keeps making money, it works. You pay down the debt and you look like a genius. But if the revenue drops...
And this is late 2007.
The revenue didn't just drop, it fell off a cliff. The Great Recession hit. Car dealerships stopped advertising. Department stores stopped advertising. The cash flow that was supposed to service that massive debt it vanished.
But before the financial collapse, there was the culture shock. Zell brings in his people.
He brings in Randy Michaels as CEO. Randy Michaels was a former radio DJ, a shock jock executive. He had zero newspaper experience.
Putting a shock jock in charge of the Chicago Tribune, I mean, that's a choice.
It was a disaster. The culture clash was nuclear. You have these Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists who take their job as a public trust very, very seriously. And then you have Michaels and his crew who, according to the numerous reports, turned the executive suites into a frat house.
The notes mention poker parties.
Not just poker parties. They held these lavish beer and poker parties in the office of Colonel Robert R. McCormick. McCormick was the legendary publisher of the Tribune. His office was a historic shrine to journalism. People were reverent about it.
And they were treating it like a Vegas suite.
It was a form of symbolic desecration. It sent a message. The old rules don't matter anymore. But the behavior went way beyond disrespect. There were serious allegations of a hostile workplace. Reports of executives openly discussing the sexual suitability of female employees. It was ugly.
And meanwhile, they are firing people by the thousands.
4,200 layoffs. They're gutting the newsrooms to try and pay the interest on the debt. So you have this bizarre, toxic situation where executives are getting huge bonuses and partying in the shrine, while the actual journalists who create the product are packing up their desks. The morale was non-existent.
And financially, it just couldn't hold.
No way. It lasted less than a year. In December 2008, the Tribune Company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
1 year. He bought it at the end of '07, and it's bankrupt by the end of '08.
1 year. It listed $7.6 billion in assets against $13 billion in debt. It was, and I believe still is, the largest bankruptcy in the history of the American media industry.
So Zell loses his $315 million.
He does. Which, let's be honest, for him was a bad day at the office, but not a fatal one. He's worth billions. But the employees, their pensions, their retirement savings were tied up in that ESOP. The stock became worthless. They lost everything.
That is the dark side of leverage, isn't it? If you win big with other people's money. If you lose, the house burns down, but the arsonist might just walk away with singed eyebrows.
And legally, it dragged on for a decade. In 2019, Zell and other executives settled a lawsuit for $200 million. The allegation was fraudulent transfer, essentially, that they structured the deal in a way that looted the company's value while knowing, or they should have known, that it couldn't survive the debt load.
They paid $200 million to make it go away.
Which is, it's not a legal admission of guilt, but it's an admission that things went very, very wrong. The Tribune deal is the great stain on the legacy. It proves that you can be a genius in one sector real estate and a complete fool in another media. He misread the industry, he misread the culture, and he catastrophically misread the economy.
It's a slice of humble pie the size of Wrigley Field. Speaking of which, they had to sell the Cubs during all this, right?
They did. That was one of the few good assets they could liquidate to pay creditors. They sold the Chicago Cubs, Wrigley Field, and a stake in Comcast Sportsnet Chicago to the Ricketts family for about $900 million during the bankruptcy proceedings.
So the Ricketts family has Sam Zell's bad debt to thank for owning the Cubs and eventually winning a World Series.
In a roundabout way, yes. History is funny like that.
Let's pivot to the man himself, because we've painted a picture of a ruthless calculator, but humans are complex. And Sam Zell was...
Well, he was a character.
He was not your typical country club billionaire. He didn't play golf. He rode motorcycles. Very fast motorcycles.
Wells Angels. Yes. He organized these trips. Every year, he'd get a group of his high net worth friends, tycoons, CEOs, powerful people, and they'd ship their motorcycles to some remote part of the world, the Andes or New Zealand, and just ride.
The image of a bunch of billionaires in leather jackets tearing through the mountains, it's like a movie. It's wild.
It speaks to his need for adrenaline. He famously rode a Ducati to work in downtown Chicago. There's a story in the notes about him doing 145 miles per hour across the pampas in South America.
At 145 miles per hour, if you hit a pebble, you're dead. There's no margin for error.
That's the point. He was addicted to risk. Whether it was financial leverage or motorcycle speed, he needed to feel the edge. He also skied, played racquetball, played paintball. He lived loud.
And he spoke loud.
Oh, the language. He was famous for it. Salty is the polite word. Vulgar is probably more accurate. He did not care about politeness or corporate speak. He titled his book, Am I Being Too Subtle? Straight Talk from a Business Rebel.
Which is clearly a rhetorical question. Subtlety was not his thing.
Exactly. He was a rebel to his core. He wore jeans to board meetings. He wanted to disrupt the stuffy corporate atmosphere. He enjoyed being the bull in the china shop.
But then you look at his checkbook and you see a completely different side. The philanthropy.
It was massive.
Yeah.
And very targeted.
Right.
He gave huge amounts of money to education. The Zell-Lurie Institute at the University of Michigan. The Zell-Lurie Real Estate Center at Wharton. He wanted to teach the next generation how to be entrepreneurs like him.
He was trying to clone himself, in a way?
I think so, yes. He funded programs that taught action, not just theory. He wanted to create more deal makers. And he never forgot his roots. He gave millions to Jewish causes. He donated to the Herzliya Interdisciplinary Center in Israel. He named a high school in the Chicago suburbs after his mother, Rochelle Zell Jewish High School. He honored that struggle his parents went through.
It's that paradox again. The guy who would gut a newspaper to save a buck is the same guy donating millions to educate children and preserve Jewish history. It's hard to reconcile.
And politically, he was just as confusing. He was generally a conservative, a libertarian, really. He donated to Restore Our Future, which supported Mitt Romney. He disliked government regulation, which makes perfect sense for a real estate developer.
But then, in 2019, he donates to Lori Lightfoot for mayor of Chicago.
A progressive, black, lesbian Democrat. It was the last person anyone expected him to support.
It shocked people.
It did. But his wife, Helen, was more liberal. Zell once joked that he leaned right and she leaned left. But the Lightfoot donation might have been pragmatic. He was a Chicago guy through and through. He cared about the city. Maybe he thought she was the best choice for the city at that time, regardless of party.
Or maybe he just liked to fight her. Lightfoot was known for being tough and abrasive.
That's a great point. He respected grit above almost anything else. He probably saw a bit of himself in her, in that sense.
So Sam Zell dies in May 2023. He's 81 years old. He leaves behind a net worth of roughly $5.2 billion.
A long, long way from that refugee boat his parents were on.
When we step back and look at the whole arc, the escape from the Nazis, the Playboy hustle, the billions in real estate, the Tribune disaster, the motorcycles, what is the takeaway? What's the final lesson from his life?
I think the takeaway is about the nature of value, with a capital V. Sam Zell had this unique, almost supernatural gift for seeing financial value where others saw garbage. He saw value in a bankrupt building. He saw value in a trailer park. He saw value in a complicated tax loophole.
It's always a but.
But he also showed the limits of that worldview. Oh. When you treat everything as just a financial asset, when you treat a newspaper like a trailer park, you miss the intangible value, you miss the culture, you miss the human element, and that can lead to absolute disaster.
The grave dancer strategy works great on graves. It doesn't work so well on living, breathing institutions.
Precisely. He proved that high risk leads to high reward, but it also guarantees that eventually you will crash. He crashed the Tribune, but he survived. He always survived.
And that brings us to the big question for you listening. We are living in an era now where everything is data-driven. Algorithms make buying decisions. High-frequency trading dominates the market. Is there still room for a Sam Zell? Is there still room for the gut instinct cowboy who rides a Ducati and buys things because he just feels the market turning? Or was he the last of a dying breed?
And maybe more importantly, if there is still room for them, should we let them buy our newspapers?
That is the question. Thanks for diving deep with us today into the life of the grave dancer.
See you next time.